Hello and welcome to the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities Hometown Haunts podcast. I'm your host, Kat Klockow, and tonight with me I have Christina, Wald, Jen Koehler, and then we have a very special guest, Any Hassebrock. We'll get with her a little bit later. First, we have our social media. You can follow us at Cin Cabinet Curio on Twitter and at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram. If you have your own hometown haunt that you would love to share with us, you can email those to us at cincycuriosities@gmail.com. Just wanting to let you know that we are an official podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud, and you can also find us on YouTube, where you're watching me right now. And you just need to search for Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities. Please like, review, and subscribe to us to let other people who love true crime, paranormal stories, and urban legends know about this podcast. Also, I do want to mention that we are skipping today our weird things we saw this week and Hometown Haunt. I know it's the name of our podcast, but our discussion with Amy this week was incredibly interesting and lengthy. I hope you sit back and enjoy it, but I do have one thing to tell you beforehand, and this is a disclaimer. We are talking about true crime this episode, and crime happens in this context when somebody gets murdered. And this deals with a love triangle with a brutal death of a very innocent woman. Also, there's adult language, so if you have little spooky ones around, you may not want them to hear this particular episode. So we'll see you in probably the next episode, or enjoy one of our archived episodes. And this is Kat Klockow. Please enjoy our interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, where we have a very special guest tonight. We have Amy Smith Hassebrock, who is the coordinator, and you're the author with the Skeleton Key Chronicles. Can you tell us a little bit about you and the case we're talking about tonight?
Yeah, my name's Amy Hassebrock. I was born in Cincinnati, raised all over the place, and came back here when I was about 25. I'm married almost 16 years to my husband, who's an attorney. I started the Skeleton Key Chronicles back in 2018 as a place to sort of consolidate all of my weird stories that I was plaguing my friends with on my legit social media. So I
Boy,
decided,
we understand that.
Right, you get it. So I just decided to create a page and just sort of filter all of my stuff there. It's sort of just a way to not drive everyone insane. After a year or so of that, kind of thought, I want to do more. I want to flesh this out a little bit. So I decided to start writing, and it was more of a personal challenge to myself. I wanted to write one piece a week until I got to 100.
Mm-hmm.
And I started working on that on October 31st of 2019, and I didn't stop. And I'm still writing. And it's just kind of my own little kooky thing to flex my muscle in terms of things that I like weird, bizarre, paranormal, all the same stuff you guys are into.
Yeah, just the strange and weird history of Cincinnati. Now, do you write just about Cincinnati?
No. I'm a girl of the world. I love to travel. I've lived all over the place. I went to 7 different schools growing up. So
wow.
I write a lot about places I've lived. I grew up in South Florida. I lived in Daytona when Eileen Wuornos was hunting. I lived there when Ted Bundy was put to death. I lived there during the Gainesville Ripper. A lot of my life has coincided with bizarre serial killer stories. So it kind of got me. Actually, my dad bought Helter Skelter in '79 when it came out, and I read that when I was 8 years old. Because so I've always been kind of obsessed with this stuff, and I just finally decided to put pen to paper and do something.
And that's wonderful. Now, right now, you're working on the Toolbox Killers?
I am. I'm working with Laura Brand. She is a friend of mine. We were introduced through Kevin Sullivan, who's the leading Ted Bundy authority. Mm-hmm. He's written 5 books on Bundy. I have been working with her in a research capacity. We've got a lot of non-disclosure right now because we've got some really exciting major stuff in the works. But Bittaker, she interviewed him in prison. We have hours and hours and hours of prison interviews. he told her where some of the bodies were buried of the girls that were never found, whose families are still awaiting them to come home to have an appropriate funeral. So we've been working on that. We're tracking down witnesses, and I'm working in a research capacity, and we've got a lot of stuff in the works with that. So that's what I've been doing as of late, and it's taken up a little bit of my time, but it's certainly been an interesting way to get through the pandemic.
Yeah, that is.
Moment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So when you get all that collected, are you going to make it into a book?
She is writing a book.
Okay.
Yeah. She's got the book. It's almost finished. We're working on a couple major network situations, but yeah, it's been a really exciting time. People are very receptive to the work that she's done. As you probably know, Bittaker and Norris both passed away within a couple weeks of each other. And so all of that died with them. Fortunately, we have multiple hours of interviews, all of her notes. She kind of goes by the moniker Siren of San Quentin because she's interviewed countless serial killers who are dying by the day, as we all know. I know Samuel Little just died a few days ago. So, and when those guys die, I mean, granted,
there's so many secrets that go with them.
Everything goes with them. And I know people like to cheer and say this is great, but for the families of loved ones that have never been found, that door closes. So we're hoping that maybe the work that we're doing can give those families at least a proper burial. I'm not even going to say closure,
Yeah. And so when that book finishes, please come back and we can talk about the Toolbox Killers, even though I know they're not Cincinnati. Sorry, Christina, but I'm interested.
Maybe no, they're not.
But they're all
was born in Ohio, though, by the way.
Okay, that's our connection.
Was born in Ohio.
So many serial killers are from Ohio. That and astronauts and presidents. Something here that's off. So tonight we're talking about a local murderess. Like a homegrown Cincinnati native who had probably one of the most twisted trials of the mid-century. Could I say that?
Absolutely.
And we are talking about Edythe Klumpp.
Not the most glamorous name.
No, I'm sorry, Klumpp family. I know you are still around, and ouch. I'm wondering what the background is on that last name. But yeah, Edythe Klumpp. And she always didn't spell it Edyth, from what I could read. Yeah. She was Edith for a really long time. So we're going to, where are we going to start? We're going to start at the very beginning.
Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah. She's known as the killer seamstress from Cincinnati.
Yeah, the lady had skills. She had the skills to pay the bills, which was a good thing because she was twice divorced and had 4 kids to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah. So shall we start with her, or should we start with Louise and Bill?
I say let's start with Edith. Okay. So we've got Edith. She's twice divorced. She's living with her 4 kids, trying to make ends meet. She's running a school. She's teaching seamstress classes at Woodward. She's waitressing at Sky Galley. She's doing it all, trying to make it happen. And lo and behold, one day, a tall drink of water walks into Sky Galley. Our main man.
Bill
Bergen. So here comes Mr. William Bergen incarnate, walking into Sky Galley whilst taking pilot lessons. I'm sure he came off like a big dreamboat. Daddy Warbucks type.
What was one of the newspapers? He's in White Christmas. My goodness. Jen, help me. It's
Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. He was described as looking like a younger Bing Crosby by some of the newspapers in New York when I was reading through. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, yeah, I could see that.
I could see it. He sort of had good features. His hairline was receding. He looked older than his 30 or 29 years, but everybody looked older back then.
Yeah, everyone did. The war did a lot to people.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
So
he comes walking in through Lincoln.
Yeah. So he comes into the Sky Galley. I guess, what do you order? two hots and a cot over medium.
Yeah.
So I guess she met him there and they started their little fling. Of course, Bill's a married man. And has a daughter of his own, right? They had a 9-year-old daughter at the time of this incident.
Linda.
Yeah, him and his wife, Louise. Sweet Louise Bergen. I'm sure she was a wonderful woman, age 32.
Yeah. Difficult to get photos of.
Yeah, I did not find one.
I found one thanks to the New York Daily News. And I am not sure how photoshopped it is. It looks a bit altered. Her smile is super huge. But yeah, she was just a tall brunette, about like, what was it, 5'5", I think is how much she was. And sweet girl. She was from Galveston, Texas, and traveled all over just like Berger did. And they met in Norfolk, Virginia at a USO dance. So
yeah, I saw they were kind of a transient couple. They had moved around quite a bit, and he was doing work for Harris Teeter Kroger derivative.
The colonial stores. Like, if you are of age, you know what colonial stores, grocery stores were, and he worked for them, and they transferred him to Cincinnati in 1955. And eventually they got merged through a bunch of acquisitions, and now it's Kroger. So everyone in Cincinnati is like, yeah, they worked for a grocery chain. Was it Kroger? Well, it now is, but it wasn't in 1955.
Right. When I saw that Harris Teeter, I started cracking up because I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina during my college years. And I was like, I'm not going to say what we called Harris Teeter as college kids.
Everyone can imagine.
Right. Hairless Peter. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. So to put some where they are geographically in Cincinnati. So the Bergens lived in what is essentially Gulf Manor neighborhood, and Edythe lived in Mount Washington, close to Lunken. And she and her first husband went into a lot of debt building the house where they had that foster school going on.
Right. The child care foster home / probably government money rolling in. If
I don't think it was rolling in if she was also a waitress. But
but I'm just saying she didn't strike me as the type of woman that did these things out of the kindness of her own heart.
She had a very difficult work background. Like, when she was a salesperson, she would constantly send clothing to herself. That got her fired. And then when she worked for the highway patrol, she was a secretary, and she got fired from that for causing too much friction in the workplace. After the testimonies that we're about to talk about, I see how that was a thing.
And I see how friction was the word that they chose. Because this lady was a bit of a femme fatale.
She was.
There wasn't a man around that, I mean, I feel like every man potentially was an opportunity for her, you know?
I think so.
Yeah, she loved men, and she loved the way they made her feel. And I think she maybe saw it as a way to get out of her life and make her life a little bit easier, as a lot of women do.
Because I think when you look at what her husbands did, she just slowly was going up the social ladder with every marriage.
She was.
Yeah. And it was tough back then because of the war effort, and then just post-war and all that. So
absolutely.
And she also gussied herself up. She started she bleached her hair up to blonde. So when you look at all these old photos of her from the trial, she has this bleached blonde. She almost looks like Marilyn Monroe's petite cousin.
Petite anorexic cousin.
Yeah.
Without any elasticity.
Yeah, that kind of.
Sorry, that's too much.
She has a very good resting bitch face.
She does. Very hard and aged face for only 40 years. I mean, very, very, you can tell she lived a rough life.
Yeah. And if she lost weight very quickly, that also would give her that gaunt appearance.
True.
Because that's what she reportedly did before she met Bill. So, yeah. Anyway.
She had to go in for the big catch.
Yeah. So, let's see. So with Bill and Edythe, they met at basically Lunken.
Yeah,
when
Sky Galley. My
Mhm.
girlfriend worked there. So I gave her a call. She's a little bit older than me. She's in her 60s, and she worked there in the late 80s and early 90s. So I gave her a call this morning. I was like, "Do you remember any glimmer of a conversation about Edith Klumpp when you were at Sky Galley?" And she's like, I don't remember anything about that. Let me call the guy that owned the place. He had only bought it for like the last 20 years of its operation, and he
Mhm.
hadn't really heard anything either. I was hoping her reputation, lived on at Sky Galley for the murderous waitress, but no such luck. But Sky Galley's a
Oh,
nice little greasy spoon inside Lunkin. I don't know if you've ever eaten there. It's great. You can watch the
no.
planes take off and
I hear good things about being able to go there. It's a very historic atmosphere because you get that greasy spoon feel.
total
Unfortunately, I
retro.
believe it has gone out of business as
Oh
of
yeah, it's been
last
gone
year.
for like a couple years. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was great at the time and it never changed a bit is my
Mhm.
understanding from its original incarnation in the 40s, late 30s until, they closed up shop. It was a
Mhm.
typical lunch counter, the chrome stools with the Naugahyde
Yes.
upholstery. It was spot
Yes.
on. So
I think some
sad
of their
it's gone,
signs
but
are still up, but the entirety of Lincoln Airport is just a fun blast from the past because it has all of that Art Nouveau look to it from when its heyday when it opened. And
yes.
Christina is mentioning in the chat that the Urban Sketchers sketched there quite a few times, and I went there for the air shows. So yeah. So they probably met at Sky Galley and struck
Mhm.
up a conversation. And according to Bill and his testimony during the trial, he liked to keep away from Louise as much as possible. Like he was in a bowling league, he was in a band. He didn't like the fact that he had to do so much. Like Louise would ask if she could go with him, and he was like, no. And then he also would sometimes have dates on the side that was never serious. So I'm wondering if Edith started out like that.
Just like a side piece, you mean, and
Yeah,
graduated to him
yeah,
moving in.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they started their affair in 1958, in April, it looks like, of 1958, and they moved in May, didn't they?
Yeah, it's my understanding they just dated 3 months before the shit hit the fan.
Yeah. And it was that first encounter. Is that when Edith met Louise for the first time? Was when they went to go pick up his stuff?
See, I thought they met the first time when the whole bank records debacle started. I thought that's when Louise Bergen became privy to Edith's existence. I didn't know that they had any sort of commingling prior to that,
I
but
think
they
it was
very well may
very
have.
limited. It may have just been like, hey, look at you taking my husband's stuff out of our apartment.
Oh
So
my God, can you imagine? I would be out there beating on the car
yeah. Well,
over my dead
according to
body.
one testimony, she was very much Dolly Parton Jolene, just like, don't take my man. He's my stuff. What am I supposed to do financially? Louise worked as a bookkeeper for a transit company that was local, and she did have her mom who would occasionally come in and watch her daughter,
Hmm.
but yeah, she was just like, Edith, please don't take my dude. He's mine. We've been married for 10 years. Like, we have a kid. And Edith is like, I like him a lot, so he's coming with me, and just collects him and takes him off to Mount Washington.
Right.
And he
It's
lived
just
there all
amazing.
summer.
Yeah, he lived there all summer. And, she was going to lose that house because that was Edith's marital home with her second husband.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted, it was Splitsville for the two of them. She wanted to buy out his portion of the home, but, and women couldn't walk into the bank and get a loan back then.
Right.
It didn't happen. You needed a husband, you needed a co-signer. Hell, you couldn't even buy a vacuum cleaner without your
Mm-hmm.
husband being home for the Kirby vacuum man. So, it was a different world back then. Women couldn't agree to anything. They couldn't be signatory on loans
Mm-hmm.
without their husband coming in. And that's when she got Bill Bergen to masquerade as her husband for all intents and purposes and co-sign on this loan for her so she could get enough money to buy her husband out of that house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my understanding that that loan went through and that the bank contacted Louise Bergen, being the real Mrs. Bergen, and, probably saying something to the effect, hey, we've got your loan paperwork or something like that. And that's what led her, to find out, I didn't take out a loan, kind of situation.
Right. So that was the testimony from, I believe it was her coworkers, who said that she had gotten a phone call late on October 30th, like around 4 p.m. And she was very quiet on the phone. And when you're getting bad news, you're just sitting there like stiff, and you're like, And she made it to like 5 o'clock and then just beelined it out in the old Oldsmobile to meet with Edith. Yeah. And that's where we have event number 1 take place. So, that was, could you explain what that first timeline was?
Well, I can try. There's 2 schools of thought with the timeline, and I don't want to spoil the ending.
Right.
But the initial timeline was that some sort of altercation happened between the 2 women at an area called Caldwell Park, which Caldwell Park is sort of up off of like in the north side area. It's nowhere near Anderson.
Right. Isn't it like North Bend Road area?
Exactly. It's off of North Bend. Okay. So then the other school of thought is that all of this occurred off Stratford Road in the Anderson Township area, which is off of 4 Mile just south of I-275, which these are 2 polar different areas on the, the loop that is 275. We're literally dealing with 2 different areas. But regardless of the location, we know what went down. And that was a big time altercation between the 2 women, at very least, possibly between the 2 women and Bill. I still think he was probably there. And it ended in Louise's death. There's a lot of discrepancy about that too, in regards to manner of death, time of death, how long did she live? There was a gunshot wound to the lower jaw. She had been beaten badly. When her body was found about 45 miles northeast of the city on the shores of Cowan Lake, of all places, nowhere in the Cincinnati metro. This is out there. She had been doused with gasoline. She was partially burned. She had obviously been beaten. The coroner's results sadly showed that it appeared that she was alive when she was set on fire because of what was inside of her lungs. That's how you can tell, are they breathing or not? Is there these carbon particles inside the lungs, which makes for an interesting and extremely horrific death, because it appears that perhaps, at least according to prosecutors, that Louise was in Edith's trunk for up to 18 hours before being dumped at Cowan Lake, which is a whole other situation.
So that goes with the scenario number 1, which is, it's just Edith and Louise, and they go to, that was a Caldwell Street.
Caldwell Park.
Park. And they, according to Edith, basically, they are sitting in those bench seats of those really big old boat-like cars that they had back in the 50s. And she's having a hard time getting it to extend back so they can comfortably sit there like a couch, I guess. So she goes back, removes the, she called it the pop bottle. And that made me just kind of giggle with vernacular, because I'm like, I called it a soda bottle. She calls it a pop bottle. But anyway, that's the linguist in me going, ha. But so she removes the pop bottle from, I guess, the contraption to let the bench go backwards. And she looks up, and there is Louise with a pistol aimed at her. And they wrestled for it, and then somehow Louise gets shot, and right through the skull. So right here, for those who don't know, it's a nice empty bit. You don't actually have bone right here. And if the bullet exits your head right here, you have a nice gap. So you're not going to have too much of a bullet. that anatomy for you, and which would explain why there wasn't at this crime scene a whole lot of bullet particles found on her body, because it could have very easily exited and then gone out a window of the car. So Edith goes, "Oh man, she's dead in my car," and little Edith picks up 140-pound Louise, stuffs her in the back of her trunk, goes back to Mount Washington, gets her stuff for class, and then goes and teaches a sewing class at, was it Woodland High School?
Woodward High School, yeah.
Woodward High School.
Yeah, yeah. And apparently she was 15 minutes late that night, but she was still there and able to complete the class, presumably with Mrs. Bergen in the trunk.
Slowly bleeding to death. And getting bopped around in that huge trunk.
I mean, oh my God.
Yeah.
So I still find it hard to believe that slight Edith was able to put Louise in that big ass trunk.
She didn't skip arm day.
She did skip arm day. I've seen so many videos of her. She's spaghetti arms.
Yeah, she's very petite. But so yeah, I don't know, adrenaline could have done something, like if she had been alone. So the next day, Edith said that she took 3 kids. It wasn't her kids. I think it was 3 young children she was watching. Put them in the back seat. Stopped at a gas station in Mount Washington. Got a gallon of gasoline. Took Louise's body up to the shore of Cohen Lake. And then dumped it. Then dumped the gasoline, the newspapers, and the rags that were found at the scene off the street. Lit her on fire and just left.
Right. And we all know how hard it is to burn a body.
It has to be at least 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 6 hours to completely cremate a human body. 1 gallon of gasoline isn't going to cut it.
Right. And you can't do that with exterior air temperature. That is in an area that's built for cremation. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously people didn't know then what they know now about body disposal, or she may have picked a plan B.
They didn't have body farms back then, so.
No, I know they didn't. Tennessee Body Farm. That's another show.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, so that's the actual story they went to trial with, correct?
Absolutely. That was the story. The murder occurred at Caldwell Park, inside the vehicle after an altercation just between Edith and Mrs. Bergen. But things changed after the trial. You know, both Edith and her lover were given a lie detector test.
Yes.
He passed his with flying colors, according to the police. She failed miserably multiple times. And with that failure, she confessed. And her confession was that the gun went off accidentally at Caldwell Park. And she proceeded to tell the story about taking the kids up to Cowan Lake and setting her afire. But things changed radically before the trial, really. In jail, she started recanting her story. Which was kind of, it's really pretty normal for people that are kind of, taking the fall for something. She kind of started changing her tune, and she eventually changed the story completely, saying that all of this was done at the behest of Bill Bergen. This was Bill Bergen's big idea. He wanted his wife out of the picture, and he knew that he would be convicted for the murder, but her being a woman, you'll probably get away with it. So we're going to make you the patsy kind of situation. And Edith, clamoring for the love of someone, like she seemed to constantly be doing, went along for the ride, at least in the second version of the story. So,
yeah, quite literally went along for the ride. So in the second version of the story, they go to the lane that starts with an S. It was
Stratton, I think, in Anderson Township. Yeah.
Yes.
And I did an interesting little map quest, and I saw that this Stratton Lane is literally 1.5 miles from where Edith's house was on Bloomingdale Road.
Oh, wow.
Her 1751 Bloomingdale, literally, you come out of that neighborhood and you go south on this Stratton Lane, and boom, there's this park right there that comes up as the pin drop for this detective. You heard about this other detective that had worked, and then he had worked on the case originally. And then once the governor got involved, they had released some more information and some crime scene photos. And this guy, I think his name was Schulte, said, oh, wait, that looks familiar. That reminds me of another case where we found a bunch of stuff in the roadway.
Yeah.
Well, this is the location where they found all of these items in the roadway, heretofore never even connected with this Edith Klumpp case. You know, this is apparently going on up north, and then they find a piece of clothing, they find half of a necklace, and some other things, really just like an hour and a half south of Edith's
Wasn't there blood on the road too?
A mile and a half. I don't know if there was blood on the road. There may have been.
Because there was something, I thought there was blood on the road that actually caused the neighbors to actually call the police and collect the evidence to begin with. It was a disturbing of enough scene.
Oh yeah, there was a bloody blouse or a bloody piece of clothing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and they were just like, holy crap, what happened here? Because this is 1958. This stuff doesn't happen in Cincinnati yet. So, so they found that half of a necklace, which turned out to be extremely important evidence.
Absolutely. It did. It was an important piece of evidence because apparently it matched the half of the necklace that was found on Louise Bergen's charred remains.
Yeah, they identified her from that necklace and her luggage keys, correct?
Well, and I know that they also got some forensic odontology. She had dental records with a former employer, believe it or not. And the actual definitive identifying her as the decedent came through dental records. And I mean, like, what employer keeps your dental records unless you're like Colgate? I work for Colgate, but anyway, that's old people joke. But yeah, you know, and everybody had reported her missing too. Bill had reported her missing. Her family had reported her missing. Yes. And, you know, she wasn't gone long. She was found pretty much.
She was supposed to do a event with a coworker at Cincinnati Music Hall that night on the 30th. Because she was supposed to go to a basically an office equipment and furniture show and then never showed up, which was strange because from what I read from her coworkers, she was a really hard worker and kind of threw herself into the job while this entire thing with Edith was happening. And then the next night was supposed to be Halloween, and she was supposed to take Linda trick-or-treating. So as a lover of trick-or-treat, I feel extremely bad for Linda, who is panicked. Her mom is gone and disappeared. Her grandmother's there, who's also panicking. And then her dad, depending on what testimony you believe, is either like, or also panicking. So I feel so bad for her. She's probably watching the other trick-or-treaters walk around her neighborhood that day. And
her life is Halloween, my favorite holiday, is forever marred for this poor girl because she has this horrible association with it forever. Yeah, it's really a nasty mess. And, you know, when you frame it a little bit differently, this case could really be much more sinister than it was depicted. I think it got a little bit of the vanilla treatment because it was 1958, 1959, Cincinnati, you know, very conservative city. But this could really be depicted in a very twisted manner if one flex a bit of creative muscle. That's a different story for a different day.
And the other thing to note is that Bill was told to wait 24 hours. He initially tried to report her missing on Friday? And the police department's like, no, you got to wait 24 hours. So it was officially, I think, on November 1st when she actually that was filed. And just for our listeners and viewers today, if somebody goes missing, you can report that immediately. You don't have to wait 24 hours. You don't have to wait 48 hours. And if the police department says you do, they are misinformed, and just keep pressing.
They are. The winds of change have blown. You no longer have to wait 24 hours, and you no longer have to listen to police officers say, oh, your teenager just ran away. They'll be home soon, as they did during the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yes.
So,
we covered the murders, Rolstead murders of the 1970s a few weeks ago. So with the missing hitchhiking girls. So That was a
Yeah, that brings me back to Bittaker and Norris. That was their primo,
yeah.
Some of their, in the 70s and 80s, that was just the way everybody got around.
Yeah, well, understandably. I mean, the bus system's still terrible here, so I don't blame anybody for hitchhiking. So 2 duck hunters came upon her body, Louise's body.
They did. They were out at Cowan Lake. It was the 1st of November. Duck season had just opened. They were ready to go out and shoot some quackers. And the next thing you know, they come upon this charred remains of what is obviously a woman. She didn't burn long, but she burned.
It was a miserable day. They thought it was a Halloween decoration.
Right. Well, hey, 'tis the season.
Yeah. It's never a mannequin.
It's never a mannequin. Except once, which was Amy out on Dyer Road. There literally was a sex doll there, and I wrote about that on my blog. Check it out, the Skeleton Key Chronicles, when I went out there and investigated that case. That was a classic. It actually was a mannequin in that case, even better, like a full-fledged sex doll. But yeah, so yeah, the duck hunters found her. She was obviously deceased. They contacted authorities. Authorities showed up, started processing the scene, made identification, presumably, and maybe cross-referenced this with missing persons reports. And they determined, even before the forensic odontology came in, that it was indeed Louise Bergen, wife of the one and only Bill Bergen. Of course, I'm sure they brought everyone in, at least Bill, for questioning straight away. He denied knowing anything about what happened, as per usual. And his mistress was obviously the next suspect. Bill underwent the lie detector, passed with flying colors. Not the same happened for old Edith. She caved under pressure, she failed, and she confessed. But she did say it was accidental. But she never really pointed the finger at Bill at that point. She took the fall. And the trial geared up soon thereafter. She was jailed on November 17th, 1958. And it took several months for the trial to kick off. It wasn't until June 15th. They were calling it, the trial of the summer. I was watching some footage today of people lined up outside courtroom 316. There were 50 people in line, mostly women, looking to be housewives, getting the latest scoop. There were another 30 people wrapped around the block outside. And one lady was interviewed in the crowd, and she said, "This is the most excited I've been since Elizabeth Taylor married Eddie Fisher." So that just gives you an idea of the climate surrounding this case. I mean, this was what was happening that summer of 1959.
And it was everywhere. Like, if you look at the news archives, you had places in Quebec reporting it in French. You had places in London and Ireland that I saw reports on, all over the continental United States, out in Hawaii. It was everywhere. Because one, Edith had, I know we kind of poked fun at the name, but it's a really memorable name. Edythe Klumpp. And then she was this murderous seamstress, sorceress maybe. We don't know what she did.
On the weekends.
Yeah. That she was this murderous seamstress, because at the time they were going with the fact that Louise was in the trunk while she went and taught a class. And that's pretty sensational. So, yeah. So,
I mean, that's creepy for these days.
It is creepy.
Come on.
Yeah.
Can you imagine in 1958, 59, hearing this story that this lady is driving around with her boyfriend's wife in the trunk for God knows how long? I don't know. That's just they were calling it the torch slaying. And Edith had kind of developed the moniker of the torch murderess. And that's what a gentleman by the name of, George Draper. Have you heard about George Draper?
I have.
The Draper Affair? Okay, so should I talk about this now, or should I wait a little bit?
You can go, because it happens while she was in the jailhouse.
It did, and it happened before trial. So chronologically, we're still on point here. So Edith's locked up in the pokey. this is still a pre-trial situation.
Mm-hmm.
This is Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving, Christmas, through the beginning of February.
Yeah.
Apparently,
think Roxanne Hart from Chicago, because she would be in her
right.
jail cell and there'd be all the media up in her face and she's sitting there and like taking interviews. So
Absolutely. I'm totally picturing Roxy Hart.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's the cool thing about the jail in Hamilton County at the time, okay? The 6th floor was relegated to males, while the 7th floor was for the girls.
Mm-hmm.
So they would pass letters back and forth. The boys, because they had to throw stuff up, would put it in a matchbox or something that could kind of, get a little lost. The girls just had to kind of throw it down. Well, while she was meandering around the jail one day, she saw this tall drink of water that caught her eye. His name was George Draper. And she told a mutual friend, I have to write that guy a letter and I want him to write me letters. So let him know and have him write the letter to me, but he's got to call me Peggy. I don't want him calling me by name.
Mm-hmm.
So they proceed this lurid romance that would put any webcam chat to shame, because I actually got a hold of one of these letters. And it was a jail mail kind of hot and heavy thing. They exchanged 3 to 4 letters a day over the course of about 3 months.
Yeah.
And when George was picked up a few months later after the fact, he was carrying all these letters with him. Wow. He was arrested on another charge. He was a petty criminal out of North Carolina. He was arrested for some other thing here locally. And the police saw all these letters. And they're like, hey, Peggy, what's all this stuff? And he's like, oh, that's my communications with the torch murderess when I was in Hamilton County Detention Center. And they're like, oh, you mean Edith Klumpp? Yes, indeed. She admitted it. And these are some racy conversations, very detailed. She goes into grandiose details using lots of adjectives about how she'd like to spend her enchanted evenings, maybe when they're not incarcerated, and how they're going to meet when they get out of this joint. It's all pretty lurid. And you can tell she was hot to trot. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind why this woman had men chasing her around, because she had no problem verbalizing her fantasies.
I was going to say desires, fantasies.
Yes.
She communicated really well what she wanted.
Absolutely. And a lot of women back then didn't do that. They would never say anything like that. But this lady had no problems.
And so, I know it got picked up on the news, because at least the Columbus Dispatch was writing articles about her and her letters to him and how they would throw it or toss it from one floor to another. So this was known to the public.
Oh yeah, there were headlines all over. The Draper Affair, they called it. I mean, I know I had originally heard about this from Richard O. Jones' book, who was an Inquirer reporter back in the day, and he wrote the book on Edith here locally called Cincinnati Savage Seamstress, the shocking Edith Clump murder scandal. And there was a lost chapter to that book that delved into the George Draper affair. And that's where I actually found that letter. But so, that was all going on. And then obviously George Draper, it's a petty crime. He's out in 3 months. Edith's left there all by herself. I'm sure she found something else to do. I have no doubt in my mind, but it wasn't widely reported on. And then the trial moves into full swing, which was a media circus. I mean, there's still a great video on YouTube. That's a lot of footage of her being interviewed by a local reporter. And it shows, the prosecuting attorney, C. Watson Hover. It shows William Foss Hopkins, who was her defense attorney. He was quite a showboat. I understand there's some memoirs around about him as well.
Well, I know her defense attorney wrote about her in his memoir as this sensational case that he had to do. So, and he was a pretty well-known defense attorney. So, yeah, and his brother had defended her in her divorce hearings with Robert, if I remember right.
Right, and that would make sense, because a woman of her means would probably typically just go to the guy who was her divorce attorney. People don't always think to seek out people based on their legal profession unless they're in the law game. They just go to the guy they know. Right. Hey, can you help me with this? And then hopefully get a good referral. But it kind of, when I was reading about this the first time when I was doing research for the story I wrote, it kind of reminded me of Casey Anthony and Jose Baez.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm shocked that she wasn't really honestly trying to hop in the sack with this guy throughout the trial, because that was just how she related to men. You know, some women relate to men on that level. Everything's sexualized. Everything's about getting me to whatever level I need to be, you know, femme fatale sort of thing. But it didn't seem that that was the case. At least nobody said anything about it. So the trial kicks off. I remember reading, did you read the thing about when they discharged the weapon, when they had taken the jury into the cloistered room and they heard the big bang and they discharged the weapon to give everybody an idea of how loud the murder weapon was? I thought that was funny. It's like, since when did they discharge weapons inside the courtroom?
1959.
Yeah.
But
I've
yeah,
never
they
heard
did a whole lot of stuff because they also took the jury over to the car, didn't they?
Yeah. They took him up to Cowan Lake to the crime scene too, so they could see that, which that's a bus trip.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be on that bus. I mean, hello.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you know, the trial went relatively quickly, all things considered. You know, it was a media circus, but it everything was pretty much a wrap within, what was it, 3 months?
Yeah, it moved very quickly compared to our modern trial system, which is so slow. And because you didn't have appeal after appeal after appeal and going to all the courts. Now that did happen later, but not at this stage. So
right.
Is this the stage where she is talking to the Reverend, the minister that was at Hamilton County Jail?
Well, she was convicted of first-degree murder, which at the time was mandatory death penalty. Okay, a date with Old Sparky. There was no way around it.
And that's what its name was, Old Sparky.
Oh, I know. Old Sparky. It's the ubiquitous name for all electric chairs around the United States, not just Ohio. So everybody just use the name Old Sparky. But she had a date with Old Sparky, and her death date was to be January 6th, 1961, which was a Friday. Well, lo and behold, Edith somehow charms her way onto the desk of the governor of Ohio at the time, DeSalle. We've got Michael DeSalle, who was our governor at the time, and Edith made a plea for clemency. She made her plea for clemency, and he took a look at the case. And DeSalle was an interesting cat. It was a political year as well, which that's a whole side saga. But DeSalle was really down with the sodium pentothal thing, sodium amytal, sodium pentothal, aka truth serum. It was used widely back then. And he thought, oh my God, Edith Clump, perfect. Let's get her on the sodium amytal. She can tell the truth. I'll have my guy there interviewing her. I'll be on the phone. We'll listen to the whole interview. And then January 4th, 2 days before her date with Old Sparky, she submits to the sodium pentothal testing and undergoes the truth serum and tells a totally different story. Now, this is when that location over off of 4 Mile came up. Where the necklace and everything came back into play. Right. And because of the evidence was corroborated. I mean, that's corroborating evidence. Hello, this lady's half of the necklace is here, and this lady says that. The governor found that extremely compelling. And based really, you know, on that really germane bit of evidence, he decided that Edith was not guilty. He lowered her sentence. He took it from level 1 down to a 2nd degree. And between that and the time that she had served, Edith was out of jail by 1971. So she had to spend some time in there, but it made her eligible for parole. Taking that from a 1st degree down to a 2nd degree allowed her to be, you know, she could be eligible for parole after a decade. And sure enough, she was granted it. And she was released.
To her daughter in Batavia.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah,
I saw that.
Yeah, and to her daughter and son-in-law in Batavia, and then eventually she found another man in
And hightailed it to
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Yeah, built a log cabin in the woods and stayed with him until she died December 24th, 1999 of cancer at the age of 81. So I'm looking actually for what happened to Bill, because in that truth serum, they actually tracked him down to Washington, D.C. at his new job.
And
And
he ran away with a 19-year-old girl.
He ran away with a 19. He eventually married her. He was 32 at the time. Different times, but still weird in my editorializing here. That's really weird. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
Yeah. And he consented to doing the truth serum. It's just then he lawyered up and his lawyer just threw it into purgatory, and they just couldn't get any court to chase him after it. So
I'm telling you, tomorrow I'm going to find Bill Bergen.
Yeah.
I guarantee I'm going to find his death certificate is what I'm going to find.
Yeah. And if you do, please let me know so I can sleep at night. Because I spent the better part of today looking for him. And the last thing I knew about him was when he was working as a government contractor for computer programming at the Department of the Navy, 1961. And I was looking he was in Maryland, and in my own notes, and I'm looking.
They were all around the eastern seaboard, weren't they, those two?
Yeah. Rockdale, Maryland. So if you happen to know a Bill Bergen and an extremely young wife, his full name was William Henry Bergen. I guess I shouldn't be naming names here to set anyone.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah, we'll edit that one out.
But you know what? If I do find something, maybe we can add that.
Yeah,
I'm pretty quick, and I've got access to Westlaw, Nexus, Lexus, all the heavy hitters. I should be able to find them.
Yeah, because I was checking out because I do a lot of stuff through the ancestry bits, and if I can find a relative, I usually find him pretty well. And going that route and using newspapers, and oh my goodness,
Bergen's pretty common though, from an ancestral name.
I know, and there's a Bergen County in New Jersey, and he's from New Jersey. Good Lord, that made it so much. I was like, Bergen, New Jersey, and then it just came out with 500,000 hits, and I'm like, what have I done to myself? I'm not gonna find him in this. So it took a while, but I did manage to find the last known bit of him, which was in 61. But if we can always have you come back on with an update, we'll be like Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh my God. That's my life right there.
I will wear
a trench coat. That stuff. Yeah, Robert Stack.
Yeah, there's a trench coat and have the great 80s synth. Oh man.
Oh my God, yes. Smoke.
Yes. All the smoke. Oh yes, that'd be fun. Oh yes. So Christina and Jen, would you like to come back and join us with our questions?
Yes.
I wanted to see your face, Jen, when we talked about how Louise was basically burned to death while alive.
That is bad.
Yeah.
Bad.
I could only imagine your face.
Did she drop off? Were the kids in the car with her? In the back seat while she did that?
Yes, according to her testimony.
Okay.
Road trip, play date at Cowan Lake.
Well, didn't Cowan Lake get selected because they had picnicked there before?
See, I don't know. That to me is a random, super long ass drive. Why anybody in God's name would drive to Cowan Lake when you live next to the Ohio River and next to all these other tributaries and bodies of water is beyond me. I have no idea.
Think about the Ohio River back in 1958. If you went into it, you came out with a third limb. So,
right, but that's precisely why you stick the body in. It's a body of water that moves, not a lake. Never put bodies in lakes, people.
They think that distance wouldn't equate. Oh, well, it's so far away, they can never trace me to going up there.
Yeah.
Right. And plus it was Clinton County. There was a jurisdictional issue with law enforcement in Clinton County. That's why determining the crime scene, the murder scene in and of itself was pretty critical. And really, I mean, nothing against Clinton County, but thank God it was Hamilton County. Because had that investigation just been in Clinton County at the time, it could have been a really different outcome.
Well, so they did drop her off in a state park, which meant the state authorities got involved. But that was at a later date.
So why the two, obviously it took place on the east side because neither Louise or Edith had any reason to be over on the west side.
I agree. I would not think in a million years it would happen at Caldwell Park. I think that is a BS story that was trumped up. It makes perfect sense it would happen down there in their stomping grounds around Mount Washington, Anderson, 4 Mile. People back in those days, people stayed cloistered in their own little neighborhoods. People weren't driving across the city up to the other end of the city.
No.
I don't know. I agree. I think it happened down there. Yeah. I think the second sodium pentothal story was the true story. I think
elaborate on that. What exactly did she say in that with that?
She said that all of this was done at the behest of Bill. That this was Bill's big idea. That they were all 3 together in the car and that they were all wrestling for the gun and that the gun went off. You know, it wasn't a 2 women kind of, let me confront you about cheating on my husband kind of thing. I mean, her whole sodium pentothal testimony is available. It's quite lengthy. And she went into lots of details. And it was interesting because her story while she was under, the truth serum stayed pretty much the same with her story that she had told people in jail, which was, this was Bill's big idea. He wanted to do this. I never wanted to do this. And she also said he threatened my kids. If I didn't go along with this and take the fall for this, because he knew I would get off because I'm a woman and he's a man and he wouldn't get off. And he threatened my kids. And it was interesting. I was looking through the book reviews of that guy, Richard O. Jones, the guy that wrote the book on this lady. And at the very top of the reviews, and granted, it's a book review, take it with a grain of salt, it's hearsay, yada, yada, yada. But there was a person on there whose uncle married Louise Bergen after she got out of prison. Like this was the guy that she supposedly ran off to Kentucky with.
And
this person who was unnamed said it was just a known thing in the family after they got married. Louise's story was always one of which Bill said that he would kill my kids if I did not.
See, that's so not far-fetched. That is so more believable.
To me too. It's like battered women syndrome. It's textbook.
Yeah. Well, and if she was desperate, I don't know, I want to call her desperate, but if her sole purpose in life was to find someone to love her, you would do anything.
I'm wondering what kind of abuse she had growing up for her to think that gratifying men in any capacity was the key to
her love and affection.
And because what she did was terrible. Like, if anything, she was at least an accomplice to murder and never reported it. And killed Louise in a terrible manner. But this had to have stemmed from somewhere. And wondering what kind of abuse that she had growing up.
And Louise was beaten, correct? Also?
Her skull was fractured.
Her skull was fractured. She was shot. She had contusions. I read one account that she even had a stab wound, but I haven't seen the coroner's report. So take that as you will. Yeah. And she was set on fire. So, I mean, she pretty much got the full Monty.
And to me, that reads extreme rage and hate.
Only a husband could muster.
Right. Edith wouldn't have had that because she didn't know.
Right. She's got the man. She's not the one. Edith didn't lose the man. Edith got the man.
Right.
Now I've seen lots of stories like Betty Broderick, an ex-wife that goes completely bonkers. I've been married to this guy for 30 years. I put him through med school and you're taking it from me. Then that bitch is in for it. That woman's in for it. But this is the opposite story. This chick bagged the guy. She doesn't have rage. It's like, sorry, lady, I took your man. The only rage I feel like might have,
I would think, just shoot her, right?
Right. But, I mean, easy peasy.
Yeah. Well, and with Betty Broderick, that anger is misplaced.
Absolutely.
It's not the woman, you know, even though, I mean, there's a gray area there, but you need to be going after the man. He's the one that's doing it.
He's the one you're in a contract with. You're in a contract with this guy, not this chick. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I'm just saying some of these women, a lot of these older school women are just not down with these, especially when they put them through school, you know, and they're paying the bills while this guy's. That's gonna really.
I could talk. I have all sorts of family drama with that, but I'm not going to air it. But yeah, so.
I always felt like he was involved. I felt like this guy was involved the whole time.
If anything, he was involved with moving the body and disposing of it. I think, I believe a monkey wrench was involved at one point, maybe bludgeoning her to death. I know Louis, it was reported, I think in the trial, that maybe her head bumped around in that trunk and that's how it got completely smashed in. But no,
those trunks were huge back then. I've lived in apartments smaller than those freaking trunks. I'm here to tell you right now.
Multiple bodies in those. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if that thing's flying down the roadway, those old cars, I used to drive a 1962 Plymouth to and from work. I had to set on 5 phone books. I'm 5'5". I had to set on 5 phone books and it had this much play in the steering.
Oh my
goodness. If you did a turn too fast, I mean, everything was just akimbo. I can only imagine being in the trunk of a vehicle like that. You would literally bounce around like being in the back of a U-Haul.
Yeah.
Well, you described her as being petite. I don't think that she could attack somebody else and do all the like moving the body would have been the hard thing.
It would have. And those trunks were high. Those trunks came down. There were huge bumpers. There were, it was this high before the lid of the trunk even met. I mean, and she really was a very thin woman. And granted, she had lost weight, which, I mean, she may have even been more in a weakened condition because she looked like she was on starvation to me. Her arms were this big around.
Have any of you ever tried to lift dead weight though?
Yes.
It's extremely hard. Like, I just remember my nephew when he was like 4 or 5, I had to rock him to sleep when I was watching him, and I had to put him in his crib, and I nearly dropped the kid in his crib because I'm not a weakling. And I was like, oh, don't wake up, kid. But I'm like, I don't think I could ever move a dead body.
It's hard. I came up in the restaurant business. I came up in restaurants, 50-pound bags of flour, which is dead weight, 50 pounds on your shoulder. I mean, 50 pounds is a lot. And that was me in my prime, in my 20s, strong as an ox.
And you're not even dealing with noodly arms and legs that are just kind of sprawling in a head that's rolling around. Heads by themselves are like 8 pounds. Like, they bob into everything. So, because 50-pound bags of dog food I've had to lug around. It's just So, dead weight is hard, especially when it has limbs and a head.
And if you have to lift it up. Yeah. It's one thing if it's just sitting on the ground.
Or dragging it.
Pick it up.
That's easy.
Yeah. But if it's in a car?
Her shoes were found on a bridge. They weren't with the body. Louise's shoes.
That's right. On the way to Lake Cowan. On the road to Lake Cowan, about a mile from the scene of the cremains, they found some stuff had been chucked out the window that seemingly belonged to
Louise.
The old Mrs. Bergen.
Yeah.
No, I know. I can't
they were found at like 9:30 in the morning, and on October 1st? No, October 31st. And
see, don't do that. That just leaves a trail to where you're going.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other funny thing is on the 31st, there were park workers cleaning up the beach, and they were about 30 feet away from where her remains were. But she was in a bunch of cattails, so they didn't see her. And since it had rained previously, or just because they had only dumped a gallon of gasoline on her, she had burned out by then, so she wasn't even smoldering. So, Yeah.
Poor lady.
What is Louise's family? Have they ever made any public statements? I mean, you have to feel really terrible for her. She really was a victim in this. I mean, her husband.
She absolutely was a victim in this, and the worst kind. She was only just doing the right thing.
I mean, it doesn't sound like she did anything that, and I guess this just tells you what the stigma back then was of divorce and stuff like that, that you know, it was very difficult to get a divorce, and to, you know, women were often blamed, you know, and that sort of thing. And it seems like she didn't really do anything wrong to deserve being murdered.
Absolutely not. It's interesting you say that, Christina, because when the police found her body, that first newspaper report that day in the Cincinnati Enquirer that sort of details, you know, this lady's been found at Cowan Lake, yada, yada, yada. The first thing was, detectives believe that the murder was committed by someone that Louise Bergen was dating. Oh. They immediately jumped to the conclusion that this, you know, newly divorced woman, I mean, it just goes with the territory. Everything is always vilifying the woman. Don't get me started on that. But I just thought, well, you know, that's interesting that was immediately what they pulled out of their bag of tricks, and not, hello, her husband, a wannabe Casanova. You know, because obviously if there's a divorce, there's an ex spouse, you know.
I mean, I'm gonna so what? Who cares? She could be a sex worker. She could be a drug addict. She does not deserve to be murdered. No one deserves to be murdered, maybe except for child molesters.
Right.
Or other killers.
Back then it was so different.
Yeah.
But, you know, it just, that men can do no wrong. That really makes me mad. And poor Louise didn't have any chance. Neither did Edith. With 4 children, how are you going to support yourself and the children? And you can't even get a loan to buy your own house. Like,
you can thank Ruth Bader Ginsburg for that one.
Exactly, that's true. That's
absolutely
true.
She made it available
RBG
for everyone.
Made sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
but you know, that's
sad.
It is sad, and here we sat, and look who got off scot-free.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look who got off scot-free. I mean,
to the point where we can't even find him right now in official records. I checked the Navy records because he's a Navy vet. He worked for the Department of the Navy as a computer programmer back in the day when computers were just emerging. Cannot find the man. Now, there is an attorney with his name that's also in Maryland, but I don't know if that is him. But no, because he's still alive and working.
Speculation. Complete speculation.
Did he change his name? I don't know.
It certainly was a lot easier to disappear back then than it is now.
True. But I was able to still find both Edith and Louise's birth certificates from the 19-teens. So it's not completely impossible to disappear as it used to be. Because now with all this digitizing of everything, we can find it if you know where to look.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, as far as that, working at the Enquirer and knowing that a lot of the digital, maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but a lot of the digital stuff is not being saved. So good luck finding stuff in 15 or 20 to 30 years.
No. Down the road. Yeah.
Are they BBCing it where they're just erasing stuff? Like the BBC's
doing that?
Oh, BBC, they did. Like, we don't have most of classic Doctor Who 1 and 2 because they erased it. That's where I'm going with that. But there's other things.
That just hurts. That hurts me. Yeah. Because the whole reason I knew of Edith in the first place was because I went into those Enquirer archives. I think someone was doing a story and I had to scan the photos in. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. You know, and if it weren't, I'm going to tell you, if it weren't for me, a lot of the history stuff that the Enquirer has, it would not be in our archives digitally in our archives if it weren't for me and my friend Jeff. Wow. And it hurts me that people don't care about it, because if the obits aren't being saved, then how are you going to figure out who your ancestors are?
Right. I feel like I don't know, for what it's worth, And I've done nothing but hardcore research and tracking people down for the past year. For what it's worth, I feel like the archives have never looked better. I started my foray into genealogy in 1988 when I was 17 years old, delving back into both sides of my family. I got one of the very first memberships with Ancestry.com in the mid 90s, early 90s. I still have a membership to this day.
Great.
Newspapers.com, LexisNexis. There are so many platforms. I agree. A lot of institutions aren't doing their own archival work. They're farming it out to third parties, but those third parties seem to be doing a bang up job because I have never at a loss for finding anything.
And the Mormon Church.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, but then they lose their rights to that stuff.
Well,
yeah,
you know, that's true. I'm speaking more specifically in terms of but you're right, like these articles and all that. Yeah.
But another point just with the photography is when you look up this case, everything is Edythe. Everything. Yeah. And the fact that I found one potentially doctored photo of the victim was just amazing. Like you look at it, I did take a photo of it. She looks a bit doctored. I'm going to be blunt. Her mouth does not look human, but that was the only
pixelation. A lot of times that it just doesn't transfer right during scans.
I think it's her mouth. I think what happened was when they got, this is the New York Daily News, when they got the photo, it looks like they whited out her mouth to look like a big smile. It actually looks like physical whiteout paint that you used to use to edit.
Was it a post-mortem photo?
No, it wasn't a post-mortem photo, but it was just a terrible photo. It looks like it's one of her. It's kind of out of focus, fuzzy, and I think it's her at a dance, and like a USO dance.
Okay.
What are you laughing about, Jen?
Well, because I've scanned in thousands and thousands of photos that they used to they needed them to run in the paper. The things that they would do to the photos in order to get what they needed for that particular story is hilarious. Like, I remember there was a well-known prosecutor in Newport that took on the mafia, and I can't remember his name, but we had a family portrait of him with him and he had a lot of children, but they needed.
I felt you were going to say wives, and I was like, wait a minute, what?
Children, and his wife was in the photo, which we've probably used for another story, but then we needed just a mugshot of him. So what they did, they put the little crop lines on there so they know where to crop, and then they painted in a suit and tie so they could get the correct bust,
like the ratio of like the bust. Yeah.
It makes me so mad because I'm like, granted, I understand why they did it, but you're ruining the original photo.
Well,
I've done it on like, what is it? The paper that you put on transfer paper. Yeah, or not even tracing paper. It's what you use. Paper. Yeah, it's the one that you used to use for the overhead projectors. So it would have just been plastic. You just put it on
like vellum.
There we go.
Yeah, acetate.
And,
acetate. I think a lot of times with that stuff, you have a print deadline. You need the photo, and you have to use what you have. And I mean, we're so lucky now to have at our disposal like amazing digital tools. But it's hard to remember. Like I started my career out like when they still did paste up and stuff, and it's
absolutely
I don't miss that stuff at all. I don't miss it at all.
I've talked because I'm in edition planning now, so I do the layout, and it's all digital, of course. But my coworkers that I work with have been there since those days, and they literally used to physically paste the pages together.
Oh my God!
I can't even imagine doing that on deadline. Can't.
Oh my gosh!
And then they had a dark room that they had to develop the photos, and they had to get the photo.
And you used to set all the time.
I got it.
It'll be set.
Yep, there it is. You found it.
This doesn't look fake to me. But then again, my grandparents were born in 1920. So I have a lot of
it does
photos
look a little
like this.
weird.
It's a little blurry and
It's blurry. I really think in the first shot that this probably wasn't too bad. Wow, I have to say she's much better looking than her counterpart, at least in
Well,
my
and the
idea.
transfer to physical paper, like a newsprint in print, is totally would look totally different than on a computer screen.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Well,
I'm an artist too. I'm an artist too. So and I was also born in 1971. So I understand the way it used to work. I remember Letraset days, ladies.
Oh yeah, I remember those, and I don't miss them.
No one does. But I remember when everything was literally done on, like on a piece of paper and then shot, there was nothing with computers. But yeah, no, I agree. It looks funky, but the transference between, a photo of an old newspaper and then onto a phone with pixelation, you've got so many varying avenues there. Something's bound to get lost.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And we have a copy that we'll throw up on the screen. And
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
I'll put some pictures in post.
Yeah, we got that. It's just a lot of the photos are very muddy from the trial, like seeing the jurors go check out the car and a lot of that stuff, because they're just really heavy spot blacks and everyone's kind of not pixely, but just slightly out of focus. So, but
well, this has been
this
has been really fascinating. Actually, what I propose we do is let's hold off on our weird things and hometown haunt till next week.
Okay.
Because this is already over an hour. But I don't want to cut anything. So I think we can wrap it up in about like 10 minutes and then do our social media links.
Sure. Okay. So you just want me to do the intro?
Can I add just one more thing? Sorry.
You can add a couple. We'll wrap up in 10 minutes and then we'll do the intro and then the
I also need to do the disclaimer. I forgot to do that too.
And I could go okay, but go on. Sorry, Jen. Go ahead.
Well, just going back to so many photos of Edith, because it's so sensationalized for a woman to be a killer. One, statistically speaking, women do not shoot, stab, or burn bodies. Men do. Women statistically poison. But also, I know this is an issue in the true crime community where they focus too much on the killer because they did such a heinous act that they really just don't you really don't know about the victim, and it's kind of, they're almost there as a prop, and that needs to change, because the more you know about the victim, the more they're humanized, the more you realize this is a person. They have people that love them no matter what situation in life they were in. Someone loved them, someone cared for them, and it just try to take the focus. So granted, I am fascinated by killers and I always want to know why they're like that, but they're not heroes. They're not heroes.
Absolutely
no one to look up to.
No. And it's kind of, especially in this digital age, it's a little worrisome that some people look up to that. That's all.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to end.
No, yeah, that's a great way to end. And although I do have one question before we go, because the sodium pentothal interested me. Is that something that, like, did they ever find out what the efficacy of that was? Was that just like the 50s were a time
sodium pentothal, people were getting that pre-surgery. I had that in a surgery in 1987 for my anesthesia. That was very commonly used up until 1989-ish for just complete knockout anesthesia. If it's dosed at a lighter volume where they're not trying to knock you out, it's more of sort of like a running, sort of babbling drunk in vino veritas sort of state that that people are lured into. But it was very much a common drug, sodium amytal, sodium I want to say fentanyl. It's not fentanyl. It's sodium pentothal. But yeah, it was it was really how people, it was a analgesic prior to surgery.
But does it have any efficacy now? I mean, is it still used for trying to get
No, absolutely not.
Okay, because I was wondering. I mean, that seems like you said that the governor, it was sort of a fad, and so I was curious.
It was, and he used it with Sam Shepard too, the murdering doctor up north, Sam Shepard. That was the huge case. The governor wanted to, that was his big idea. We got to give this to Sam Shepard. It's going to crack the whole case.
Wow.
This governor was really into sodium. Maybe he owned rights with the sodium pentothal distributor. Who the hell knows?
No, go ahead, Christina. Sorry.
Oh, I was wondering if there's ever been a movie or anything made on this. You said there's been some books written about it.
So there's an episode of Deadly Women where they did, the University of Cincinnati has a very large case study of this particular crime. And they interviewed the woman who manages it. And it came out around 2012, 2011. I do know it's season 6, episode 17. It's midway through the program. Unfortunately, I couldn't see it because it's not streaming anywhere. But
I watched it today. It's streaming.
Where is it streaming? I couldn't find it.
Discovery Plus.
Let's put it in the notes. Yeah, let's put it.
Yeah,
that's probably where it's streaming. That's why I couldn't find it.
Just launched and it has Investigation Discovery.
No, I watched it today. I saw it originally when it came out. It's called give me just a sec.
So you watched it on Discovery Plus as well, or is it somewhere else?
No, I didn't watch it on Discovery Plus. I watched it just for free on whatever came up under the video. It wasn't something I'm familiar with. Let me tell you what it is real quick. It is
if it's Daily Motion, I'm going to laugh. But
I think it is Daily Motion. Hold on a second.
That's like a wonderful Ukrainian.
Wasn't sodium pentothal debunked as the truth serum?
See, I thought
absolutely. This is that crazy shit they did back in the day. You know, people just did whatever the hell it's called Without Conscience. Is the name of the episode. Like you said, season 6, episode 17. And it's on Daily Motion. Yeah, I watched it earlier today. It's right here, free for.
Well, let's put the link in the notes so people can watch it.
No, don't put that link in the notes. Make sure your browser and everything gets cleaned up there, Amy, because it's not a good website to visit.
I'm a pro, trust me.
Okay.
I'm a pro. This ain't my first rodeo.
Okay.
Do you want me to send you that link though, or are you guys not interested in posting that?
Well, if you think it's,
I have no problem with this ever. I mean, this is a direct. I mean, it's a direct link result. If you Google Louise Bergen, Deadly Women.
Okay. Well, and you said it's also on Discovery Plus, so I can give both.
It most likely is
for sure. I'm just gonna. That's an Investigation Discovery show, correct?
Yes. So I think that's under the pantheon of Discovery Channel.
Okay, because they literally just launched a streaming service, and it has all
yesterday. Wow.
Yesterday.
When we're done, I'm getting my ass on there, and I am gonna subscribe because I need true crime 24/7.
Yeah, $4.99 with commercials, $7.99 without.
Oh,
I know
just like Hulu, which is where you used to be able to watch all this stuff.
I refuse. For some reason, I refuse to get Hulu.
I refuse to get Hulu. I'm not going to get. Why do I refuse that? Is it my demographics?
I have so many.
We have it. We have Hulu and Netflix and Disney, and
we got to cut it off at some point. And
I'm like, this is too much.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'm going to get Discovery Plus though. I got to have my 90-day fiance.
Yeah, because I need Joe Kenda. Do you
love Kenda?
I love Kenda. I fall asleep during it because his voice is so soothing, even though he's talking about horrible, horrible things.
Oh my God, that's my Forensic Files. Yeah.
Yes,
that's Forensic Files.
Yeah.
Well, this has been super. We're so glad that you came and talked to us today.
Yes. Come share more strange stories with us in the future.
Oh my God.
I love
it. Was so fun.
I'm sure, Jen, do I speak for both of us where we're happy to have a true crime aficionado to sit and just talk true crime without a whole lot of horrible looks and judgment from our significant others?
Well, I don't have one of those, but I will tell you, when I wear my favorite murder sweatshirt, I had someone ask me once when I was working at Amazon. She asked me, what's that? I'm like, oh, it's a true crime podcast where they talk about murder. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, you don't understand. That's cool.
Yeah.
But that it, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a true crime aficionado. I've been doing this way before it was cool. And I've been developing an encyclopedic knowledge of these crazy cases that just for some reason deposit in my brain. And I don't know why I retain some of this bizarro knowledge, but I love it. And I do honor the victims. I mean, and the more I worked on this Bittaker and Norris case, I mean, that really brought that into the foray for me, dealing with these poor girls that are 15, 16 years old, just babies, and the vile things that they had to tolerate before their deaths, and their poor families that just waited for them to come home and they never showed up.
Yeah.
So sad. There's never a good reason to kill anybody unless it's a creepy pedophile
or self-defense. Someone breaks into your house and is trying to hurt you. Sure.
Right. Shoot them in the knees. That's my motto.
Yeah. Or just shoot them once and run. You don't need to go all ape shit and stab them multiple.
I like your
Jason style.
I love that you're stabbing too. I mean, such an intimate way to kill an attacker.
Okay.
People tell me, they look at me and go, "You scare me." I'm like, I am a perfectly nice person. I don't ever want to hurt someone.
Yeah, I totally have been told that too.
Yeah. Creepy girl.
on that note, everyone, thank you for joining us for another wonderful and very educational episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities Hometown Haunts with our guest, Amy Hassebrock.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
It was a lot of fun, ladies.
You can check us out on our Instagram and Twitter, and all of our information will be in the links below in the description page. So thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye. Be sure to check out my blog, The Skeleton Key Chronicles, at theskeletonkeychronicles.com, and follow me on all social media platforms. Thanks, guys.